Okay, Francisco, you have 15 minutes to present. After your presentation, your guests will have to leave the room. You will sit there and you will be asked questions by the commission.
Okay, so afternoon and teachers and classmates, my topic for today's presentation is teaching techniques of student willingness to learn and participate. To give a little context, the research took place in San Andres where I was sent for a practical experience, specifically in third grade B. There were 39 students in third grade and 6 of them participated in the B program, that is a programa de integración escolar. After the first 2 weeks of observations, the issue I noticed in the classroom were motivation and attitude, because I saw that the students had a lot of problems with be attentive and respond to the lesson. So I had 2 quotes. When we started the research, my research problem transformed to what affects the students' willingness to participate in the classroom, and then it transformed to teaching techniques of student willingness to participate, because I saw that they were unresponsive, indifferent to the lesson, and they did all the time the same things. I have these 2 quotes because they helped me define my question. As you can see, the first one is talk about how attitude is important, students' attitude is important to how often they study and if they enjoy it. And it was a problem I observed inside the classroom because they didn't care about the lesson. And the second one was taken from the English program, and it mainly states that to plan a lesson, you have to consider a lot of things, and students need to interact together in a meaningful manner, and also that student differences must be considered when planning. And it was different to what I observed in the classroom because the teacher did the same activities all the time, and the students weren't responsive to those types of activities. So then came my research question: how do teaching techniques affect student willingness to learn and participate? And this follows a critical paradigm because its purpose is not only to understand a phenomenon, but also to change it. So I also consider part of this paradigm action research because it strives to understand like a phenomenon and learn from its changes. There were 3 specific objectives for this research. The first one was to identify what experience is extrinsic or intrinsic, and my first interest was an interview because, as we can see, an interview allows us to go beyond what was observable in the classroom. The second objective is to identify the use of different teaching techniques and how the use of different teaching techniques relates to student willingness. And my instruments were lesson plans and interventions and videos, because observations give us gather in-depth information about anything that may happen in the classroom. And as I previously mentioned, the interventions are part of the actual research because it strives to observe a phenomenon, change it, in this case willingness to participate, and learn from those changes. And my last objective was to determine the relationship between teaching techniques and student willingness to learn and participate, and the instrument was also an interview. To assure the trustworthiness of the instrument, they went through 3 different assessments. First, teacher's assessment, then peer assessment by 2 classmates, and lastly, external advisor assessment by the teacher of the other section. And you can also assure the trustworthiness of the instrument by a combination of them because they gather that data from different sources, not only from one source. And at the beginning of the research, it comes up with four specific objectives instead of 3. And there was a confusion also with the paradigm because at first I thought that I wanted to understand something, but in fact I wanted to change that reality. So that changed with time. And the application of the instruments were the major findings were that their main motive to study English was communication and travel. They mentioned a lot that they wanted to travel, meet foreign people, and be able to communicate. And what they most said that the way they liked to learn was through group work and manual work, because they didn't feel on the spot when they were alone, for example, at the front of the class. They felt more nervous in those situations because the teacher was staring at them and the student was staring at them. So those were the major findings. The second were two lesson plans, and on November the 23rd and the 30th, and it gathered data from the participants with similar characteristics. So the 39 students participated, and the expected open goals for the field notes were students' participation, teachers' intervention, group work, teaching techniques, external factors, students' motivation, and some of the new emerging goals were use of resources and body language. I use different techniques in these two lesson plans: group work, pair work, whole class participation, storytelling, flashcards, listen and do, listen and draw, and so on. And the two interventions were supposed to last 45 minutes, but they last from 1 hour to 1 hour 50. And the last instrument was another 6-question interview on the December 7th, this time with the teacher, because she could help me understand the relationship between teaching techniques and willingness to communicate from another point. And the questions gathered data on the students' participation, the students' attention, motivation, and teaching techniques. The interview was also in Spanish, and the major findings was that there is a direct relationship between teaching techniques and students' willingness, because the way things are done in the classroom affect their motivation to participate. But it also came as a revelation, so to speak, that it's not only what you do, but it's the attitude the teacher has when doing things. Because if the teacher behaves negatively to the student, then the student will respond negatively. For data analysis, there were two triangulation matrices, and they ensured the study would be accurate because they gathered data from different sources. The first triangulation matrix was with information from the first interview, the one with the students, and the observations of the field notes, and the emerging goals for interactive teaching, factors that affect students' motivation, and diversity of teaching techniques. The inferences deal with the realization that the way things are done in the classroom affects directly how students will respond, and the way the materials used in the classroom also are big determinants to how much students will participate and put effort throughout the lessons. The second triangulation matrix gathered information from the second interview, the one with the teacher, and the open goals for the field notes, and the emerging goals for the teaching techniques and student motivation, work dynamics, and external factors intervention. And the inferences deal with the realization that teacher's attitude is important and is a big determinant for how students are going to respond to the lesson, how much they will be motivated and willing to participate. There were 3 big conclusions of the study: that when the activities are not challenging enough, the students' motivation to participate drops noticeably. The way the activities are engaged also affects students' motivation, and teachers need to consider students' diversity and plan accordingly. Although these were like my conclusions, it was different to what I observed first in the classroom, because the teacher in her interview answered me that teachers needed to pay attention to students and their needs and their differences. But when she but they are too broad of a concept to say exactly how. They don't give specific information. And now moving to the learning objective, I also find a oral expression or speaking objective, and I can say that it's a productive skill which main focus is intelligible and meaningful communication and expression of thoughts, ideas, feelings, and more. And the content related with the objectives are abilities, can grasp and using contractions with those abilities. For example, I can do this, but I cannot do that. Give direction, descriptive adjectives for people, feelings, actions, and situations, expressing quantitative and numbers to 50, and asking questions like why, how, where, how many, how much. Also asking questions about actions, for example, is he studying, is he doing that, is he doing this recently, and giving information about non-topics, asking and giving time, using possessive, there is, there are, and passive. As strengths, I say that I be able to use the topics that we are giving for the class and use them in a stimulating manner that we can see them, and also use the different teaching techniques to consider student differences in the class. I cannot say that in my practical with so many of the topics that I previously mentioned, but we saw abilities specifically with animals, and I could plan the activities thinking on the students' needs and differences. I noticed in the classroom that they had difficulties communicating when they had to do it alone. I mean orally, so I did many group exercises, oral group exercises. For example, there was one role was a group, another role was another group, and I also have used the whole class interaction when they had to speak orally but with the class backing them up, and that helped them try to participate. And as weaknesses, I say that even though I mentioned that I could use different techniques, group techniques for oral participation, it was a weakness the inhibition students showed when I asked them something and they had to answer orally but individually. And also the mother tongue use, because it was easy for them to speak in Spanish. It was difficult when in oral situations because, for example, I asked a student something and at the first try they tried to say it in English. But if it was wrong or they weren't sure, and I said like, okay, are you sure? You're halfway, or maybe you want someone to help, then everyone will start speaking Spanish because it was easier. Even though maybe their answer would be correct in Spanish, but they didn't try in English anywhere else, and they kept saying in English, and it was like, okay, maybe, but then I had to say, okay, but how about we say it in English? And then they would try again, but still they wouldn't try if I didn't prompt them to try. And as challenges, I say that the level of English to be able to accommodate to oral instructions, because as it says here, the levels needed for instruction should be lower than intensive language learning and to keep students speaking the target language. Because when it came to oral activities, for example, sometimes I know it was easy for students to answer worksheets, or sometimes when we check worksheets on the board, they were able to write successfully, or for example, when I did storytelling, they understood what I was talking about. But if I asked them to repeat, for example, a complex sentence, like, I like doing this, they weren't able to repeat it orally. But if they wrote or if they listened, they understood. And keep students speaking the target language. It says here that the target language is simply, you have to be there as much as possible, but it was also, I take it as a challenge because it was difficult for me to focus like in every group inside the class. It was difficult, so I see it as a challenge. That's all. Thank you.
Hola,